Okay, thank you, Ernie. Glad to be here. I'm a PhD researcher from the department, and my research is about 19th century book and printing cultures, and then I'm looking at these through the lens of missionaries China printing. Pretty much my research, bigger research is focusing on printing technologies, material review of books, prints, and type layout, and more importantly, the material transformations of knowledge across cultures. So this is a little bit of the context before to get to know about my research. So for centuries, Chinese book block printing was a writing-centered process. So the textual reproductions rely very much on craftsmen's hands, transferring a hand draw or writing text onto the wood and forming and printing blocks. So when early 19th century Protestant missionaries specifically, they have these ambitious we want to printing Bible in Chinese, and then with this ambition entering the China, they found that they enter well established solid book industry and printing market built around these traditions. Yet, as history tells us, missionaries in the late 12th centuries, missionaries, they eventually developed a system that allowed these character-based systems, writing system to operate within European letterpress, or I call it typographic systems. So this is a matrix of missionaries' smaller font and currently holding in Oxford University, France. So yet my research pretty much argued that this missionaries' production system was neither a straightforward transfer of European technology onto a Chinese convention, nor a simple continuations of Chinese practice. I would say that it's a product of hybrid labor and material negotiations along the way. So one in which neither a European technological superiority nor Chinese typographic primacy can fully explain this outcome. So on the screen, this is all kind of missionaries Chinese book and made in different sort of technologies, woodblock printing, stereotyping, hand-cut metal type, cast-stone metal type. They are pretty much under this umbrella of missionary Chinese printing. So the current scholarships, they often portray these Protestant missionaries as a pioneer who introduced some sort of like technologies to certain regions in a rather unilateral way. So, and one that inevitably replaced traditional practice, especially with the perceptions of typography equal to a proper way of printing or making books. In other ways of textual reproductions operating in other technologies such as lithography or other complicated sheets has been long overlooked. So it left some question for my research. It can be reduced to a simple level deadline, how they began and why they do that, and where they got their resource and what have abandoned or picking up along the way of productions. So these presentations, it's a snapshot of the bigger research, and it traces one continuous process of how Chinese printing or Chinese writing system, together with its material, technical, and cultural conventions, was progressively translated into a modular, replicable typographic infrastructure, and what have to be negotiated, preserved, or sacrificed at each stage to make this transformation possible. So today I will present this, I will answer this question through three very simple and brief case study. And together it shows what groundwork has been laid before a typographic infrastructure was adequate to support a Chinese printing project. So, and on a side note, on my time scopes, this is pretty much when the Protestant missionary they operate a Chinese printing outside of Chinese proper, so it's pretty much not in the contact zone in terms of culture and language. So the case one, example one will be the Anglo-Chinese College, located in Malacca, and we'll focusing on its woodblock printing productions. So moving away from the central of Chinese government censorship in the early 19th century, the Anglo-Chinese College was officially established in Malacca in 1818, and on Malay Peninsula and in the Strait settlements, which is part of the British colony at the time. So at the time, it served as both as a printing center and base of waiting China for opening up their door for allow more foreigner publishings in China proper. So this was a hub, and for my research, this was an important period because for missionaries printing, because it allowed experimentations and adaptations, and finally led to the development of their own approach on woodblock printing productions. So the Malacca station was marked by its technical advancement at the time. So it not only produced Chinese publications, also Malay and multilingual, but more importantly to the case, it's the woodblock printing. So on the left, on the right of the screen, on the left of the screen, so it's a typical Chinese commercial source publications, and on the right of the screens, it's Malacca Anglo-Chinese publications. So two of them, like on surface level, they look very identical, and this was intentionally done in a very simple language because the missionaries they did that intentionally. Preserve the format. They want to preserve the format that's familiar to the local readers, so it's easier for them to circulate and accept by the reader. But I would say it's easier like smuggling into the China proper writing. Just pass over on the street without censorships. So, but I would say this Chineseness they keep was not simply a passive disguise or a mimicry of a format. It actually marked the first steps in integrating missionaries' own production demand, and with the outward conventions that accepted by Chinese community. So these integrations and motivation can be seen, can be found in the material evidence. So first of all, the unconventional materials was used to cope with material shortage, but at the same time, they were also adapting to a book format that looks Chinese to them. So this pamphlet, actually, it's one of the copy of a lot of similar copies of the books. The paper was made by a very thick and soft Madagascar tree, and which is not a conventional material to use in Chinese book. So this suggests that once a woodblock was carved, the text was preserved, and text could be printed on demand in a small or big quantity as they wish on whatever material is available on the spot. And the second pictures, on the other hand, the calligraphy styles also, it's a features that they always vary across the page in the same editions. And this is a feature of Malacca publications. And this is actually pointing to a carefully curated labor force behind the productions. So these periodicals, I'm expecting you seeing like different styles of the carving. It shows a very different executions on the text, and is the index of the book, and this is the main text, and which is suggesting that the role of transcriber, the cover, and printer was usually combined to a singular individual in Malacca. which with each person responsible for a distinct part for the publications. So in my research, these actually mark the first steps to, please differentiate their productions from the conventional Chinese practice. And concurrently, we move to different geographical locations, and a little bit earlier on the timeline is Macau Press, running by East India Company, and it was Portugal colony at the time. So here I'll introduce a hand-cut metal type in the case study. It's a challenge of using these hand-cut metal type of printing and voluminous dictionaries. Also on the side note, this East India Press on the Macau, they have a very intimate connections with the Malacca transport in terms of labor exchange and material exchange, whatsoever you call that. So this dictionary, it was the first rigorous attempt to adopt Chinese scripts or writing system into the logistic of typographic productions. However, the source of hand-cut metal type has long been overlooked because it's pretty much cut by hand one by one, and then it's not fully fits on the conventional definition of casted metal type. So, but actually in this research about the textual reproductions, it provided valuable data or information about a practical side of material frictions, and also how did people typeset in Chinese character next to the Latin scripts at the main text and large volume scale. So the dictionary was printed in folio format, but it's actually like this big in the height of the spine, and it can be identified from the chain line of laid paper and the page registrations, the small alphabet around under the page. And these running roughly into 700 pages per volume across 6 volumes, and it took 8 years to complete for this set of dictionaries. So throughout this period, all the Chinese metal type was hand-cut to pair with a Latin type of apologize for my pronunciation, bourgeois typeface. So it equals to more or less like 8-9 point. If you print a 8-9 point Time News Romantic or Microsoft Word. 3.175 millimeters approximately. And the Chinese type was cut on soft alloy metal blanks. So if you're looking through the dictionary, the character size fluctuates from page to page, and sometimes it's larger, sometimes it's smaller, as long as the typeface, the character fitted to whatever space that the blanks around. And the biggest features I found in this in the layout is over the time the main text, they actually shifted from a 6.1 millimeters to a more condensed 4.56 millimeter squares. And then also the type hierarchy is also reduced over time. So this is the earlier, the kind of the snapshot of the metal type I collect from the earlier page or earlier volume of the dictionary, and this is from later. So they used to have different hierarchy for the main text and the footnote, and then eventually they shrunk into kind of like stable down to 4.4 millimeters. It doesn't seem like a lot on the numbers, but if you look at this is early pages and that's the later, and you can find that the leading is actually tighter. So this was not because of any technical inequality or any errors, but logistical necessity on that. And it's aimed at reducing paper costs and managing a large number of sorts required from Chinese typesetting. So the Macau printing press operating keep actively running for 20 years until 1833, something like that. And during this period of operations, this hand-cut metal type was not only being used inside Macau, but you can also be found in Malacca and also been borrowed to the American Presbyterian missions by commissions. Um, so although it's pretty much by definition, it can be an ad hoc or temporary situation, but actually it's a valuable asset to share between printing enterprise and keep refining until the London missionaries directed board, they decided to move forward. Let's having the punch, we need a permanent solutions of Chinese type. So it was in this context, we move forward to my case, last case, is Samuel Dyer. He's recruiting to the London Missionary Society, and actually he began his journey for developing a Chinese metal type. Actually, his work has attracted most scholarly attention in the field because it's a moment, he's starting from a moment when big sectors, they shouting that we are coming to punch. So baselines were dropping here. But actually the detail of how he started and his experimental was not fully discussed yet. So actually he began with experiments deeply rooted in the past experience from his missionary counterparts. So specifically, he was experiment with stereotyping from woodblock. In his own word, the text was hand drawn by his working very hard language local Chinese teachers and cut into wood in pin, transcribed in Penang, and then sending to Malacca to cut into wood, and then forward to London to cast into a metal plate, and then further hand saw into individual type. And then there's a punch cutting work and running parallel to this work, and then he's called this source of metal type a temporary one. So alongside the development of the type itself, the process itself also requires thinking carefully of how characters should be selected, arranged, and presented on the page. So this specimen of sorts shows that the how the character could arrange in a random particular order in a certain size and format of books, and it shows that Dyer and maybe his missionary counterpart was systematically standardized what Chinese books should look like at this point. So move forward to the later stage of century. Together, all this effort, they form a standard visual framework for the Chinese book. This is a later, finally they have a punch, they have a punch allegedly, and then this is printed by the larger metal type by Samuel Dyer. So here you can see some of the elements, they are kind of like splitting up, have a little gap in between. And this is a sign that like these elements was originally have functions on woodblock printing, mainly help with the binding, the folding of the paper, but on the typographic productions, it's gradually turning into like an ornamental functions. So this was a process overall rooted in a local technical productions and integrated a certain demands of production logics, and the outcome is eventually defined the foundational typographic infrastructures of Chinese printing later and sinological printing in the Europe. So to close this presentation, I'll just drop some big words. So it's like the agencies always belongs to the network, it's not to a single inventor. And I hope that this emerge of like this research could encourage how people looking at the history, printing history, not just a recipient of Western technology or a source origin of its own tradition as an active part of a global modern typographic landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this rich narrative. First question.
Yeah, thank you. You essentially presented a transition from woodblock to movable type made out of metal. But if unless I'm mistaken, if I remember correctly, the first instance of movable type during the Song Dynasty in China was made out of ceramics, not metal. And so I'm wondering if you skipped that because it's insignificant in the history, or
Oh, yes, I skip that part because I'm looking things in scope, and then if you dragging the long history of texture reproduction, you will find that the Chinese source of movable type, they are sporadic use, and then they are support for certain context of printing, let's say the genealogy of in the tribe or village, everyone have the same names, even your neighbors, so you can kind of quantitatively select the set of letter is acceptable. So that's support the like movable type in Chinese sources for mostly in that use. Allegedly, I'm not an expert here, but you can't deny that there's a broader landscape of commercial woodblock printing. They are just running in a certain procedure in the print shops, and they have very detailed allotment of professions who are responsible for transcribe, who are responsible for covering. So it's a more solid practice in the context of my research. So yeah, I see that origin part.
Thank you. Further questions? Shall I take this as an invitation to release you from this room? Thank you all. Your race, praise.